Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen Aufregens video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 16 of my battle series of videos. In this case, my second Napoleonic battle. This video will cover the Battle of Hohenlinden, which occurred on the 3rd of December 1800. As all my other battle series videos, this video is not specifically designed as a historical video. It's designed to assist players in creating scenarios of historical battles. As a result, my emphasis is on the units, what they did in the battle, rather than any in-depth analysis of why General X did whatever he was supposed to have done or not have done. This map shows the situation in late April 1800. The main takeaway here was the bulk of the forces were in Germany, and it was expected that the location of the main conflict would occur in Germany. Napoleon surprised the Austrians by driving down in Italy, which is covered in my Battle of Marengo video, but nonetheless, the main battle, or the pivotal battle, did actually occur in Germany, and in this video will focus on what actually was that pivotal battle. I had a bit of issue with the terrain of this battle. In fact, I had a lot of issues with any map concerning this battle. This is about the best map I could find covering the terrain, less the forests. This shows some of the intervening hills between the paths of advance around Eisen. Unfortunately, the map is not very clear, so let's see if we can improve on it. This map, in German, was the best map I could find showing the lines of advance. It does not show hills, of which a few were critical in the defence. However, most were in the forest, so this may not be a major impediment in understanding the battlefield. For clarity, we'll be using this map. The forest also contains rough ground and steep hills. As I lack detailed maps of this type of terrain, it's not included in this map. In 1800, the French had not yet formally created their corps system, and in many cases they didn't even call their corps-like formations corps. The French divided their army, in this case, in three parts: left, right and reserve. For want of a better words, each would represent a corps. As a result, we can say the French army consisted of three corps-sized formations, with the two involved in the battle consisting of 3 and 4 divisions respectively. The last corps-sized formation, called right wing, and consisting of 3 divisions, was not involved in the battle. I must assume this was further to the south, or even in the rear of the French position. On the Austrian side, the Austrians did not use corps, but did employ an ad hoc column system. There were 4 ad hoc columns, or corps-sized formations, involved in the battle. This image here shows the Austrian 4 columns, or pseudo-corps-sized formation, consisting of 2 divisions each, of 3, with the main army consisting of 3 infantry divisions and 1 cavalry division. Due to mistakes, one corps-sized formation never got into combat, and another was so badly commanded as to basically be totally ineffective. Let's now go through the sequence of the battle. Confident, that is, the Austrians were confident after their victory over the surprised French at Ampfing, the Austrians continued on the offensive and continued to advance after the French, only to find the town of Hague abandoned by the French. Now convinced the French would continue to fall back to the west, the Austrians decided to more aggressively continue the pursuit. To speed up his forces' movements, the Austrians split its army into 4 columns that would take 4 routes or roads to arrive at the crossroad town of Hohenlinden. They would then continue the pursuit from there. 2 columns would march west along separate roads, while a column would take a northerly route, and the final column would take a southerly route. All 4 columns were ordered to aggressively attack any French resistance they encountered, as it was believed to only be a rear guard. This was a fatal mistake. Little did the Austrians know the French had decided to make a stand at Hohenlinden. While the French had initially planned an offensive, the surprise of the Austrian offensive, or move forward, caused them to reconsider. Having detected the Austrians, the French decided to form a defensive line around Hohenlinden and hold the centre and left while attacking on the right, that is the French right. General Richepen's division was given command of the attack on the right flank, supported by General Decane's division. The critical right-wing attack consisted of 2 divisions, while the remaining 4 infantry divisions, supported by a cavalry division, would hold the defensive line. All the Austrian columns started moving forward at dawn. Marching on the all-weather highway, Colleretz's column made good time despite heavy snow. At 7 a.m., the advance guard collided with the 108th Line Infantry Demi-Brigade of Grouchy's division. Defending deep in the forest, the 108th held their ground at first. However, the Austrians sent a grenadier battalion in a flank attack and drove the French back. Colleretz then committed the Bavarian Brigade and a second grenadier battalion to keep the attack rolling. As the Austrians burst from the tree line into open territory, Grouchy led a powerful infantry and cavalry counterattack. Colleretz's troops reeled back as the 11th Chasseurs de Cheval Regiment broke a square of grenadiers, a very rare event, and the 4th Hussars Regiment overran an artillery battery. Having lost 5 cannons, Colleretz decided to suspend his drive until Latour and Riche came up on his flanks. Anxious about his open left flank, he sent 2 grenadier battalions back in search of Riche's column. On the Austrian right flank and to the north, Kienmeyer's flushed out French outposts from the town of Issen. Schwarzenberg, who led Kienmeyer's left division, pushed southwards to crash into the division of Bastoul and Ney. An Austrian force captured the town of Forsten, but Moreau committed their reserve cavalry to help drive them out. A back-and-forth struggle began between the two forces along the line. On the far north flank, Kienmeyer's right division began to come into action against Legard's forces. Both sides were fully engaged, 5 Austrian infantry divisions against 4 French infantry divisions, and with 1 cavalry division each. Latour's Austrian column, moving along muddy forest trails among snow and sleet squalls, fell badly behind. At 1000 hours, his column was still well to the rear of Colleretz's corps. At this time, the gunfire from Kienmeyer's and Colleretz's combat could be clearly heard to the front. Even more disturbing were sounds of battle from the south. Lahers made the extraordinary decision to divide his division into small task force. He sent 1 infantry battalion and 6 cavalry squadrons to the north to look for Kienmeyer's. 1 battalion and 4 squadrons marched south to find Colleretz, and sent 2 battalions and 2 squadrons to assist Schwarzenberg's attack, and 3 battalions and an artillery battery to help Colleretz. This left him with only 3 battalions and 6 squadrons. This was a critical error. Like Latour's column, Riche's columns on the Austrian left flank had to contend with terrible roads and snow squalls, and it too fell behind. They fell far behind Colleretz, reaching Albaching only at 9:30 a.m. Consequently, Richepence's division, the French division, passed in front of Riche's Austrian column. Near the village of St. Christopher, the 2 Austrian grenadier battalions sent by Colleretz stumbled upon Richepence's marching column, cutting his division in half. With single-minded determination, the Frenchman left his rear brigade under General of Brigade Jean-Baptiste Dorotet to fight it out and drive to the north with his leading brigade. With the 8th Line Demi-Brigade and 1st Chasseurs de Cheval leading, Richenpence seized the village of Muttenbeth and advanced to the main highway. There he confronted elements of the Austrian cavalry division. Leaving his 2 advanced units to bear the brunt of the Austrian cuirassiers' charges, Richenpence wheeled the 48th Line Demi-Brigade west onto the highway. Aware that this route took him directly into Colleretz's rear area, he formed the Demi-Brigade's 3 battalions side by side with skirmishers protecting the flank. Hearing firing to the east, the Austrians sent 3 Bavarian battalions from Colleretz's column to investigate. These units moved to the southeast and began embroiled in the fight with the French. 2 more Bavarian battalions now appeared and blocked Richenpence's path. After a brief fight, the 48th Line overwhelmed the Bavarians, and the French continued their advance. On the Austrian far left front, Riche's column's patrol told him that 2 French divisions were in the area. Instead of pushing into combat raging to his front, Riche's cautiously decided to wait for his stragglers to arrive. Riche's then divided his division into 5 small columns, none of which were powerful enough to affect the battle, and he sent each forward on a separate forest trail. Riche's held back 3 battalions and most of his cavalry as a reserve. This was the second major error of the Austrians. At 11 a.m. on the French right flank, Descartes came up in support of Richenpence. The situation was very fluid, with the units blundering into each other in heavy snowfall. The fresh infusion of French troops finally broke through the Austrian opposition. Spearheaded by the Polish Danube region, Descartes turned east to grapple with Riche's column. Descartes' men overcame Riche's small column one by one, pushing them back to the heights of Albacht. The Austrian managed to hold upon this hilltop position and capture 500 French soldiers while suffering 900 casualties, but otherwise his forces was out of the battle and could no longer influence it. Sensing victory, Mordor ordered General Gradier's division and Grouchy to attack around noon. Undeterred by Latour's weak pressure to his front, Ney swung to his right and began pounding Colleret's troops. Pressing his attack, he overran their positions, capturing 1,000 soldiers and 10 cannons. Grouchy also returned to the offensive. Hemmed in on 3 sides by Ney, Grouchy and Richenpence, Colleret's column finally disintegrated in a disorderly rout. Archduke John escaped capture on a fast horse, but many of his men were not so lucky, and thousands of demoralised Austrians and Bavarians surrendered. In addition, over 60 artillery pieces fell into French hands. Latour learned of the left-centre column's fate when its fugitives flooded the nearby woods. Abandoning his position, he retreated to Issen, leaving Kennemeyer to fend for himself. On the Austrian right flank, where Kennemeyer got news of Colleret's destruction, he ordered his division commanders to fall back. After a brief fight against Legrand on the northern flank, Archduke Ferdinand pulled back with his dragoon brigade, covering his withdrawal. Legrand reported fewer than 300 casualties, while rounding up 500 prisoners and 3 guns. Thanks to Schwarzenberg's able combat leadership, his division escaped a very tight spot. At one point, a French officer came forward under a flag of truce to demand his surrender, but the Austrians successfully disengaged his command and brought them back to safety that evening without the loss of a single cannon, a rare success for the Austrians on that day. The Austrians reported losses of 798 killed, 3,687 wounded, and 7,195 prisoners, with 50 cannons and 85 artillery caissons captured. Bavarian casualties numbered only 24 killed and 90 wounded, but their losses also included 1,754 prisoners, 26 artillery pieces, and 36 caissons. In round numbers, this amounts to 4,600 killed and wounded, plus 8,950 soldiers and 76 guns captured. The French admitted casualties of 1,839 soldiers, 1 cannon, and 2 caissons, but since several units failed to turn in reports, Mordor's army probably lost around about 3,000 men in total. This was a decisive defeat of the Austrian forces and a great victory for the French. While Napoleon was not involved in this battle, this was an interesting battle nonetheless, with some commanders displaying extraordinary skill, especially Richenpence, who made the critical decision which won the battle for the French. In terms of overall strategy, there's nothing particularly significant. If the Austrians had advanced in a more coordinated and cautious manner, the flank attack would have been quickly stopped. But due to errors on the Austrian side and no errors on the French won. The first step is to look at the forces in a manner which may be useful to wargamers. Starting on the left wing, which consisted of 3 divisions, the French in this period used demi-brigades instead of regiments, but for all intents and purposes they were regiments consisting of 3 battalions. The cavalry regiments were not large compared with the latter period of the war, but there was a reasonable number of regiments nonetheless. Artillery was also not very common in this period. The bulk of the French forces were in the Reserve Corps, directly under the French CNC. It consisted of 3 infantry divisions and 1 cavalry division. The cavalry division was held in reserve, while 1 division held the front line, along with the 3 divisions already covered. 2 divisions consisted of the critical French right outflanking forces. The final corps, the right flank, was not directly involved in the battle. I have to assume it was positioned somewhere to the right and off the playing area. The fact the French were able to win with a third of their forces not directly involved was rather impressive. Moving over to the Austrians, the Austrian right column consisted of 2 divisions, one of which was commanded by the only Austrian commander to distinguish himself in this battle. 1 division was not heavily involved in the battle, taking up position well to the north of the map. The Austrian forces were divided by poor terrain. The right centre column, while being heavily delayed by the poor conditions of the road, was almost not involved at all in the battle. It consisted of 2 divisions. Leadership was, to put it mildly, poor, as the corps split itself up into small detachments, which had almost no effect on the battle, only to run back to reconcentrate once the battle had been lost, and actually pretty much abandon the Austrians. The centre, or the left centre corps, was the largest of the Austrian corps, consisting of 3 infantry divisions and a cavalry division. It performed reasonably well, but after being held back to its front, attacked in its rear, and finally attacked on its right flank, it simply collapsed, and its rout spelled the defeat of the Austrian army. The Austrian left flank also suffered from poor roads and took a long time to move up. While it was blamed for the disaster because of this delay, I suspect the main cause was the failure of the right centre to get involved in any meaningful manner. This corps was made up of 2 divisions. It also repeated the error of the right centre corps and broke up into small detachments which simply could not affect the battle, and then had to reconstitute on a hill in a defensive position and basically not have any major influence on the battle otherwise. But at least it didn't run away when it saw defeat occurring. I normally start describing the force mixes required to duplicate this battle, but players can do that themselves. The only guide I can provide is the scale required to duplicate the battle effectively. At over 40,000 side per men, each figure needs to represent at least 200 men. Otherwise, the force mix will simply be too large to complete in a single day. Even at this scale, we're talking about 100 elements per side, with 75 per side being heavily involved in the battle. My preference would be a set of rules which has a scale of 250 to 1 infantry scale and maybe 200 to 1 cavalry scale, and perhaps 1 to 20 cannon scale. If not, double these values to get the element count down to a reasonable level. The ground scale would need to be at least 1 in 10,000 to get the entire battlefield into a reasonably sized playing area. This map is interesting, but it does not show the Austrian corps at Albuquerque, so I'm uncertain how accurate it is. The option I'm increasingly adopting for the recreation of historical battles is to use a figure game conversion of the SPI Napoleonic's Quad and Folio board game. This allows for variable unit scales, which for this battle I've adopted 1,000 infantry per infantry element and 500 cavalry per cavalry element, or roughly. The scenario document provides the original TO&E, so players can change the scale to whatever they prefer. The playing area shown here is optimally a 3 by 4 foot playing area. This does require some custom terrain creation. However, for my initial games, I simply use felt to represent the rivers, roads and woods, and my standard 4 centimetre built-up area terrain features. The ground scale, in this case, is 1 in 10,000. This shows the initial deployment with the elements clearly visible, as long as you have very good reading glasses. The commanders are not displayed. Players simply place commanders as they see fit. This scenario is hard to get working and requires special rules to slow down the 2 rear columns and prevent the column closest to the French from retreating. As an optional rule, if they do, the remaining French corps arrives as reinforcements. Most figure gaming rules do not lend themselves to reproducing a historical battle in this level of detail, as a lot of Napoleonic battles was the movement into battle, and most rules don't cover this. You need a scale of 1 in 5,000, that's ground scale for small battles such as Marengo, or 1 in 10,000 for medium-sized battles such as this one. The really large battles tend to just involve higher unit densities, so I rarely need to go beyond a ground scale of 1 in 10,000, but I do need to change the element scale, going from 1 element equals 4,000 men, for example, for Leipzig. Another interesting option I've been experimenting with lately is to use the old WRG rules to reproduce the battle. The French would field 172 elements and the Austrians 168 elements, so this would be a really, really large game. But 2 players per side may be able to play out the battle in a few days of gaming. Other options are to use a big base set of rules, such as Bloody Big Battles for Napoleonics, and this has a pretty strong focus on historical conflicts and can also include the pre-battle manoeuvring. There are smaller scale rules which cover history rather well. The Age of Eagles is good, but the games tend to be too large for most players. But if you have the time, space and figures, it is a good choice. Many other good sets of rules fit in this category. They do a good job, but they generally need too many figures, and it's impossible to simulate the manoeuvring before the battle. For some battle, this is not an issue, such as Austerlitz, but for Wagram, or particularly in Hohenlinden, it becomes a really major issue. Rules such as DBN are fun rules, but not really focused on historical simulation. Absolute Emperor may be a better fit, but even they basically fight out historical battles in a very abstract manner. Rules such as Blücher can also be used, but they're more focused on playability than really duplicating a historical battle in all its detail and glory. But nonetheless, they give you a good, fun, quick game. And so this completes episode 16 of my military history videos covering the Battle of Hohenlinden. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende!